we're recording this video on August 5th. We have 4 or 5 months left in the year. And so if you, for example, have not started contributing to a 401k, but you would like to max it out for the year, you'll have to set your percentage to a very high amount. And again, depending on how much money you make, it might take up your entire paycheck if your plan administrator even allows you to contribute that much. Welcome to Wealth in Progress, the weekly podcast for professionals in their 30s and 40s trying to build wealth while juggling careers, family, rising expenses, and the occasional panic after scrolling social media for 5 minutes. I'm PJ, founder of Wealth and Plan, a virtual financial planning practice serving clients nationwide. If you want to learn more or start a conversation, head over to wealthandplan.com. We are currently accepting new clients and would love to get to know you. Here is this week's episode. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Wealth in Progress. I am your host, PJ. Hope everybody's having a great week and great summer. I know school's about to start here in a couple of weeks, so if you are a parent listening to this, hopefully you're getting ready to send your kids off to school. In this week's video, I wanted to try something a little different, and we're going to do a 5-part series on how to best understand your employer benefits. It seems like there's this misunderstanding out there on what exactly your employer provides to you in terms of benefits, how it all functions. There have been questions on what do I need, what do I not need. And so really, I figured I'd make this 5-part series, keeping it pretty high level, pretty easy to understand, but really just going over the different benefits that might be available to you and how you can better understand it and hopefully make a little bit more of an informed decision in terms of if you should sign up for something, if you should decline some sort of a benefit, and really making sure that you understand how it works. So with that being said, we've got a little presentation here today, and so these are the 5 topics that we'll cover in this series. Today we'll start off with 401k basics. We essentially just wanted to talk about what is a 401k, how does it work, how does the match work, what are the different sources of contributions that you can make. So we'll make sure to cover that in today's episode. Next week, we'll talk about disability coverage, highlighting the differences between short-term disability and long-term disability. And that way you can kind of compare and contrast and really make that informed decision on which one's more appropriate for you, or if it's both, just depending on your career and your profession. The following week, we're going to talk about group life insurance. Essentially, this is just a life insurance policy that is provided to you by your employer. So we'll dig in a little bit on that. And typically, an employer will provide you with some sort of coverage that they'll pay for. And then you can, on most policies, you can sign up for supplemental coverage, which essentially extends the dollar amount of death benefit that you might have. The next week, we're going to talk about AD&D coverage, which most people think is life insurance, and there are some similarities, but there are also differences, and so we'll want to make sure to highlight those for you, again, just so you have a better understanding of how that benefit works. And the very last week of this series, we're going to talk about some of the other benefits that might be available to you, such as health savings accounts, flexible savings accounts, plus anything else out there that you might have access to, and we'll define what those are and how they work. So let's jump into 401k basics. So first, let's just define what a 401k is. Essentially, what a 401k plan is, it's a payroll deduction retirement account. What does that mean? In other words, whenever you decide to contribute to a 401k, you have to set a percentage of your paycheck that you're going to contribute. And so the plan administrator, it could be Fidelity, could be Empower, could be whatever, major company that's managing your company's 401k plan. They'll take your gross income divided by the percentage that you've set, and that's how much you'll contribute into your 401k that pay period. A 401k is not the type of account where you can just say, hey, today I'd like to put in $2,000 into my 401k. Unfortunately, it does not work like that with 401ks. These types of plans, you have to deduct dollars from your paycheck, and that's how money goes into it. So for example, we're recording this video on August 5th. We have 4 or 5 months left in the year. And so if you, for example, have not started contributing to a 401k, but you would like to max it out for the year, you'll have to set your percentage to a very high amount. And again, depending on how much money you make, it might take up your entire paycheck if your plan administrator even allows you to contribute that much. So again, when you're talking about putting money into a 401k, we have to be strategic and make sure that we set that correct percentage that goes into your plan. Then there are different sources of contributions that you can make. And so the two sort of most popular options out there are either traditional 401k contributions or Roth 401k contributions. And really the definition, we've talked about this in some of my previous videos, traditional 401k, money goes in pre-tax. So what does that mean? You take your gross income before any taxes, you contribute a percentage of your income. It lowers your income for the year when it comes to you filing taxes, and that money grows tax deferred, meaning that you've not paid taxes on those dollars just yet, but you will have to at some point in the future when you do decide to take those distributions. Obviously, the intent of this 401k plan is for you to use it once you're in retirement, but you will have to pay federal income tax on all the distributions in your traditional 401k. Roth 401k, on the other hand, contributes dollars after taxes have been withheld from your paycheck. This does not lower your overall income, and you do pay tax on these dollars today, but the benefit of a Roth 401k is it then grows tax-free for the rest of your life until you do end up taking out those distributions in retirement. So again, there's pros and cons. The way that we make that decision is we try to determine whether you're in a lower or higher income tax bracket now, as opposed to tax bracket that you will be in retirement. In terms of the investment pool, so when it comes to your 401ks, the investment pool is typically limited, and it's limited to the different mutual funds or retirement date funds that the plan administrator provides to you. So how do you pick the best option? Typically, from what I've seen, the easiest option for investors to choose is the target date fund. I'm not saying that is the right option. I'm just saying that is typically the easiest. The way that target date funds work is they're typically a little bit more expensive, but they essentially, you select the year that you're going to retire. So you might have a target date fund of, 2045. So really that just assumes that your retirement year from this company will be 2045. And what happens is the allocation of stocks to bonds gets smaller and smaller as you get closer to retirement. What I mean by getting smaller and smaller is whenever you're younger, you're going to have a higher mix of stocks as compared to bonds. The closer that you get to retirement, you're going to have a higher mix of bonds as compared to stocks. And the reason being is the closer you get to using these dollars, the target date fund is going to put you more into those bond funds, which are typically safer than stocks that you will own in that specific fund. So the reason why I say target date funds are easier is because that allocation is automatically done for you by an asset manager that controls that target date fund. So there might be thousands of different holdings within that target date fund, and the allocation just gets more and more conservative the closer that you get to that age range. The reason why they're typically more expensive is because somebody has to do that work and pay attention and change those allocations on your behalf. The other option that you have is pick from a pool of mutual funds that are given to you and create your own allocation. So why would you do that? Well, typically it involves a little bit more work, but you have control in terms of how aggressive you want to be. So there's no third party controlling your allocation. If you want to be 100% stocks up until retirement, you have that option. Again, proceed with caution, talk to a financial professional before you make that type of a decision, but that option is there for you to build your own allocation if you like to. And talking about contribution limits, there is a limit how much you can contribute into. So for example, as of the date of this recording, we're in 2026. If you are under the age of 50, your annual contribution limit is $24,500. after the age of 50, you do have a catch up that kicks in. Um, we've talked about this in one of my previous videos. There's actually an additional limit called the 415C limit. I'm not going to talk about it too much, but it's an overall limit that can go into your 401k plan. The 24,500 that I'm talking about, that is just the employee deferral limit as we discussed in step 1 here. Let's talk about the employer match. So first thing that you should kind of be cautious of and really just be familiar with is oftentimes you'll hear that the match is free money. And while it is true, there's some actions that you have to take to qualify for that free money. Really, the first thing is you just have to understand that your employer will typically only contribute money into your 401k up to a certain percentage. And that percentage also depends on whether or not you contribute to the 401k plan. So what do I mean by that? In other words, different plans have different definitions in terms of how much of a match they'll give you. So you might hear language such as, we'll match 100% of your contributions up to 6% of your salary. So in other words, for you to maximize your match in that example, you would have to contribute 6% of your salary. So let's say you're making $100,000. You'd have to contribute $6,000 and your employer will provide you that match dollar for dollar up to 6% of your salary. If you contribute $6,000, they'll match 100% of those contributions. For that year, you'll get $12,000 into your 401k plan. If you decide to contribute 10% of your salary, your employer will only contribute up to 6%, right? So there's a limit typically on how much that they'll give you in terms of free money. There's also different definitions because it's different from plan to plan. Some employers might say they'll only match 50% of your contributions up to a certain salary limit. So in our example here, let's say an employer says they'll match 50% up to 6% of your salary. So in our example of making $100,000, you'd have to contribute $12,000 into your 401k plan for you to get the full match of $6,000, because that'd be 50% of what you contributed from your employer. So again, you have to be careful and really understand the language of your employer plan and how they define the match. Another thing that you should be mindful of and why it's not always free money is there's typically a vesting period in order for you to receive those match dollars. So you might again, depending on your plan, you might see language such as there's a cliff schedule where maybe you get 20% vest the first year, then 40, 60, 80, 100, so on and so forth. And this only applies to the match. So whatever that you contribute into the 401k, that is always going to be 100% yours. It's going to be 100% vested. This is only talking about the match portion of the contribution. So again, just be aware of that vest schedule. Some employers, they'll have what's called a safe harbor match. And what that means is typically they'll contribute less to your 401k plan, but it'll be 100% vested. For example, an employer might have a safe harbor match where they'll say, regardless of how much you contribute, we will add 3% of your salary into your 401k plan. But because that contribution percentage is lower, we are going to make sure it's 100% vested into your plan. So hopefully this kind of gives you a better idea of the different ins and outs that go into your 401k plan. Part of what we do at Wealth and Plan is we do look at your employer benefits and we do make sure that you understand everything that's available to you. We read through your plan documents and we make suggestions on how you can really maximize those benefits that are available to you. Hopefully in today's episode, it gives you a better idea of the 401k part of your benefit and really just what goes into you making that decision of how much should I contribute? What's the best method in getting the dollars into it? Should I do traditional or Roth? Because there's a lot that goes into it behind the scenes. All right, so As I mentioned earlier in this video, next week we are going to talk about disability coverage. So come back next week. We're going to cover short-term and long-term disability and really the ins and outs of both of those policies. Quick disclosure page. Really what I want you guys to know is that all of this is for educational purposes only. None of this is investment advice. Everyone's situation is a little different, so always talk to a financial professional before you make any decisions. And quick reminder, if you enjoy watching these videos, if you're on YouTube, please like, please subscribe. We really do sincerely appreciate your support. At the same time, we do cross-post this to Spotify and Apple Podcasts if you're listening to us on the go, so feel free to subscribe on those platforms as well. We come out with these videos on a weekly basis. We also post highlights on our company LinkedIn page and our Instagram. So if you just want, 30-second highlights every week, feel free to follow us on those platforms as well. But other than that, hope you guys enjoyed this week's video. If you have any feedback for us, we always appreciate hearing that, and hope you have a great rest of your week. I'll see you guys next week talking about disability benefits. Bye-bye.